Employees of Reddit who successfully got their nightmare bosses fired. How did you pull it off? Story 1. When I was hired at my job, I had no idea my boss was an absolute nightmare. She was like a greatest hits compilation of bad manager behaviors. She would lie and throw us under the bus to protect herself, talk badly about other team members to us, trying to get us to agree with her and dislike others. She also blatantly lied about her qualifications and couldn't handle any of the tasks she was supposed to, so whenever she got involved with a project, it took 10 times longer and the results were worse. People outside our department outright refused to work with her and she wasn't allowed on their projects. But everyone in our department was so good at what we did and so good at covering for her that it looked to everyone like our department was running smoothly. Less than a year after I started, she told a coworker she thought it was time to fire me and replace me because I had professionally disagreed with her and ended up being right. When I heard that, I went straight to our COO, who oversaw our department, and explained what was happening. I told him I didn't want to give an ultimatum, but I couldn't continue working on a team where I was afraid of losing my job anytime I professionally disagreed with my boss. He was horrified and spent the next few days speaking individually with other members of my team. That was toward the end of the week. The following Monday was normal, but on Tuesday, while I was sitting at my desk working, she suddenly tapped me on the shoulder and told me she had been fired and was leaving. I was so shocked I just said, "Wow, sorry, good luck with everything." It was wild and unexpected, but I was glad they acted so quickly. Since then, our team has been great, and no one outside our department refuses to work with us anymore. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I used to be a store manager at sneaker sporting goods store in the mall. One of my co-managers was banging one of my teenage employees in that back stockroom after the store closed on a regular basis. This was going on for several months apparently. I found out when said teenager came to me and she said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about the banging in the stockroom. I had to call the police and the corporate about this. We arranged a sting with the help of the girl, as she acted out for the police to meet up with my co-manager after work. Basically caught him with his pants down, to use the term. Story 3. Worked register at a tour company. I had a manager who absolutely hated me for some reason. Easily one of the most unpleasant people I've ever worked with, constantly yelling at us for no reason, snapping at me for answering a question a new hire asked even though she wasn't around, and once wrote me up as being 30 minutes late when I was actually only 2 minutes behind. Just petty, toxic stuff. We all suspected she was skimming from the tills. Strangely, she was always the one to count down the drawer whenever someone got fired for stealing. Because of that, I made it a habit to count out every bill when giving change out loud in front of the customer. If they were owed $23, I'd count 21, 2, 3. We also had cameras pointed right at the registers. One day, the GM pulled me aside and said $20 were missing from my till, and they were planning to fire me. I told them straight up to check the cameras. I always count my bills in front of customers. And wouldn't you know it? That miserable manager Jennifer was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Screw you, Jennifer. I won. Story 4. It wasn't just me. It was a team effort. At my old job, we got a new food and beverage director. He was in charge of both the restaurant, bar, and the conference area, but he couldn't have cared less about the conference side, so he focused all his time on the restaurant. He got rid of the bussers and made every server become their own bartender. He created a new drink menu and worked with the head chef on a new food menu. He fired people he didn't like and hired his drinking buddies from old jobs as servers. He was an alcoholic who would always disappear into his office with a cocktail or glass of wine, leaving us servers to struggle. I remember one shift in particular. I was scheduled for both lunch and dinner, and I was the only one working lunch. We were showing the local college football game in our college town, and it happened to be our rival team playing that day. Every table was full, every bar stool taken, and people were even standing and just ordering beer from me. My chefs were running food for me. He came out from his office to check on things. I was deep into making drinks and had just finished one of our special drinks in the team colors when he complimented me on how well I was doing. I turned around and he was gone. My drink was gone too. I didn't see him again until he complained about a table in the restaurant, my middle school principal and her mom, and asked me to take that table. After a few months, everyone hated him, including the friends he had brought with him. On New Year's Eve, we had a huge party, and everyone was expected to work. Even his boss was there. Halfway through the night, he said he had to go home because his wife and daughter were sick, but he had told his friends he was going to a concert right across the street. We told his boss, went out to the wraparound patio, and sure enough, there he was with his wife waiting to go in. He never returned to work. Story 5. I had been working in retail for 5 years when upper management decided all managers needed to switch departments to learn every area. I was a low-level manager, so I didn't have to switch, but my boss did. I ended up with one of the favorite managers in the store and thought, how cool. Yeah. She had a lot of trouble adapting to our department, so I picked up much of her slack because we're a team. That's how it should work when someone is in training. Since I had been doing the work in that department for 4 years, I was much faster and more efficient than she was. Instead of appreciating the help, she grew resentful. Suddenly, nothing I did was right. I was always in trouble and constantly getting written up for the smallest errors. One day I noticed a lot of my department's supplies were destroyed before I was allowed to do so. I had to hold on to them for 6 months before I could write them off. When I asked around, I was told my boss threw everything away in the compactor without following the correct steps, which meant my inventory would be way off. I was livid. I confronted her, and she denied it all. During this time, I was taking some leadership classes that my boss also attended. We got to know each other, and he quickly realized my boss was lying about me. We made a deal to catch her in the act because his boss was on my manager's side, not his. One day, I found some supplies in my supply closet that weren't supposed to be there. I had asked my boss, confused yet, for those supplies and was denied. Yet here they were with her signature on them. I confronted her, and she said she hadn't changed her mind. They pulled the camera footage, and sure enough, my boss, who was keen on getting me fired, was the one who took the supplies off the floor and put them in my supply closet. Later that day, my boss went to her boss, the one who declined my supplies, claiming I had forged her signature. While I was doing my boss job again, I heard her being paged to the office. She was fired over it. Everyone blamed me for her losing her job because she was the favorite manager. I was called a horrible person and a liar. She hunted me down on Facebook randomly over the next 5 years just to cuss me out. One time, she came into my new job, recognized me, and tried to accuse me of stealing money from her. Thankfully, as soon as she left, I ran to the office and explained who she was and what she was doing. I haven't seen her in about 5 years. I hope she changed her ways, but it's doubtful. Story 6. At the time of this story, I had recently gone through a very dangerous and stressful separation from my ex-husband and was dealing with his wrath while trying to care for 2 very young kids by myself and work a full-time job. My situation wasn't good, but my boss at the time was very supportive and understanding. She helped me by giving me shifts I needed, which were a bit unorthodox for my position, but we made it work. After 2 months of this arrangement, my boss had to leave the company due to her own husband assaulting her to the point she needed assisted living. She moved closer to her family for support, and we were introduced to a new manager. Initially, he seemed okay, but I couldn't shake the feeling his kindness wasn't genuine. I felt uneasy around him, given my precarious situation. I explained the reasoning for my odd schedule, and he insisted it would remain the same so I could continue caring for my children while paying the bills. About a month after his arrival, everyone's hours began getting cut. His explanation was no hours from head office, yet he started hiring his friends and giving them full-time positions at the expense of tenured employees who had held 40-hour weeks for years without issue. I continued quietly with my remaining hours, trying to stay afloat financially and handle my still stressful situation. Then he called me at home while I was off duty. He told me I needed to sign a document stating I was available 24/7 for shifts, and that any restrictions in my schedule would mean I was voluntarily resigning my position. Basically, had I signed this, I would have lost my job and been unable to file for EI, because it would be labeled as me quitting. I refused, so he had his superior call and threaten me as well. Again, I refused, explaining my current situation, and was met with shouting and more threats. I hung up and called HR immediately in tears. After I explained everything, they confirmed this was unacceptable and contacted the management involved. I was allowed to keep my schedule, and my boss was reprimanded severely for his approach and behavior. I later learned he had cornered all other staff he hadn't hired and forced them to sign the same document. Tension at work was high, and since I was the only one who thought to call HR and stand up for myself, the rest of the staff stood behind me, hopeful my outspokenness would turn the situation around. Things got worse over the next several months. He would insult people publicly in our workplace group chat, call at all hours of the day and late at night to yell at employees whether they were on shift or not, and degrade and mistreat staff during working hours. Mistakes were always blamed on secondary management, myself and 2 other staff members, regardless of who was actually at fault. Morale was at an all-time low. The last blow came after he returned from a month-long vacation. His new employees were very lazy and refused to complete their shift duties. I was stuck working with one of them during an overnight delivery. His employee left early and refused to help shelve the huge order, and I was unable to finish by the end of my shift. I stayed 30 minutes late, but needed to leave to pick up my children from childcare. I informed the next shift employee of the situation and left the store. Several days later, I received a call from my boss at 11:30 p.m. He screamed at the top of his lungs about how disrespectful it was for me to present the store to him in such disarray after his vacation, and said I would be receiving a write-up for my insolence. He said, "My responsibilities don't end when my shift ends," and insisted that regardless of my other priorities, I was to always put my job first. I was so taken aback by his elevated tone, I didn't even know how to respond. After calming down, I went to bed and began my shift the next day. In tears, I confided in the other 2 assistant managers about my intentions to report this new situation to HR, since it happened on a Friday and I had to wait until Monday to speak with them. On Monday, I called and was told they would privately look into the incident and that no repercussions would occur due to me speaking out. I went to work that night to complete my night shift. Tuesday morning is when it all came crashing down. I assume one of the assistant managers let slip to the boss my intentions to go to HR. He never arrived before 9 a.m., but by 5:45 a.m., he flew through the door in a rage. He marched around the store shouting insults at me, pointing out small imperfections, a small space left on the shelves, a coffee pot only half full, and took pictures for documentation. Then he presented me with several write-ups, all stated as final warning related to the previous delivery situation. I refused to sign them and left in tears. I called HR, again to report the new development and reminded them of their earlier promise of no repercussions for speaking out about his behavior. Crap hit the fan. The next day, after he was gone, I went into my personal file and found 9 write-ups he had post-dated that were not previously in the file. He had marked them as refused to sign and sent them all to HR earlier that day. 5 of them had never been presented to me. I photocopied all of them and called HR one more time with this information. He was forced to apologize to me and was later removed from his position in the company. Story 7. I was an intern at a tech company, and during a one-on-one mentorship meeting, my boss asked what skill set I wanted to pursue. I said I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship. He replied, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned I just quietly repeated that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting ended awkwardly after that. I always thought I'd be courageous in the face of blatant sexism, but instead I was silent. A 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. A couple weeks later, I was out to lunch with some coworkers and a woman who had worked at the company for years but had been out on contract, so I hadn't met her yet. They were talking about the boss and the rude things he'd said or done. I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within days, he was fired by the big boss. About a month later, I started my first contract doing back-end work, and I loved it. From what I understand, I wasn't the first to have serious complaints about him, just the last. Story 8. My manager tried to take advantage of me. I reported it and got him fired. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift that ran late. Instead of turning into my street, he drove about a mile in the opposite direction to a bar so we could get to know each other. I had one drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second drink. When I asked again to leave, he became aggressive and tried to assault me. The details aren't important, but it was a frightening experience. I emailed the restaurant owner about what happened and showed up for my next shift. The owner was outside, firing Leo based solely on the word of a brand new employee he'd never even met. I was impressed, and the rest of the mostly young female staff were grateful. That restaurant became a great place to work after that. 2 years later, on my first day at my dream restaurant, during pre-shift, Leo walked out to present the specials. He saw me and froze. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I immediately told my new manager about our history. I shared my story and the emails between the previous owner and me. They confronted Leo, and he was fired again. We worked in a specialized food style where chefs circulated between restaurants. Leo later applied for a job under me when I was the hiring manager. He never got a call back, obviously. I'm out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him for the rest of his professional life. I do not forgive or forget. Screw Leo. Story 9. I got the second in command fired. She talked big to anyone in my section of the business, claiming she knew how to run the area. She didn't. Alright, story time. She wanted me to prep for the 6 o'clock rush. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I told her I would get to it since I was stocking the back room while things were quiet. Around 4, she started harassing me to prep for the rush. Since she had been bullying my coworker to put her till away, I snapped at her that I would get it done in 10 minutes. A mistake, because it takes 7 minutes to prep the gravy and cheese, among other things, when we only have 2 microwaves. Needless to say, it took longer than 10 minutes. Lo and behold, the winner came to gloat. Not only that, she decided to check the temperature of the food. Fine, it was still heating up and all. She yelled at me that it was all too cold and promptly threw it out. I nearly snapped. I can't imagine punching a 4'10" person would look very good on my resume. I went to the large storage room to cool down for a bit. When I came back, I found out that the dumbass had put plastic back in the steam table, where we're only supposed to put metal containers, since, plastic melts. I swiftly removed it and dumped the gravy into a metal container, putting the plastic into the sink. I moved to the front and found her yelling at my coworker for using my till. I stepped forward and asked what the issue was. I told her she could use my till, since she had been ordered to pack hers up for the day. She yelled at me again. I was practically vibrating. Another manager noticed and pulled me aside, taking me upstairs where the customers couldn't go. I promptly burst into tears. After probably half an hour of blurry cleaning, I had sobered up enough to return to my area. A shift change had happened while I was gone, so I had a different coworker this time. I found out from this coworker that in the half hour I was gone, she had put plastic into the steam table again. I can't imagine that replacing the steam table would be cheap. She had also been harassing this coworker as well. So here we are, nearing the end of my shift. It's about 5:30, and it's starting to get busy. We were ready because dumbass threw all of our stuff out. I sighed and handed in my 2 weeks on my next shift. Later, I heard from my coworkers that she had been fired, mostly because of the evidence I gave the manager who took me upstairs. HR had a blast with that one. Story 10. I worked at a rundown gas station that kept getting robbed and occasionally shot at. I was broke and needed the money, so I stuck it out. After my first 2 weeks, payday came, no paycheck. The owner told me sometimes payroll gets delayed, so I waited until the next payday. Still nothing. I confronted the owner, who said he hadn't been able to add me to the payroll yet, but promised to pay me under the table the next day. When he showed up with cash, he tried to pay me less than half of what I had actually worked. I told him he needed to put me on the books and pay me properly. I asked if the cash he was offering had taxes deducted and if it was reported. He was surprised that I actually wanted to pay my income taxes. I reminded him tax fraud was a real thing, but he didn't care. I got heated and told him I'd go to the labor board if he didn't pay me properly. He told me to go home and that the labor board wouldn't do anything. So, I did, but I didn't stop there. I called the labor board, who immediately sent me forms threatening fines if the owner didn't pay me what I was owed. Then I called the CRA and reported his tax evasion attempt. They were very interested. A few weeks later, I finally got my paycheck. I also learned from friends who worked there that they'd been called by the CRA and asked if the owner had ever paid them under the table, assuring them they wouldn't be in trouble if they had been honest. Most admitted he had. Months later, I stopped by the gas station and found out the whole thing had sparked an investigation. Not only was the owner charged with tax fraud and evasion, but it turned out those frequent robberies were staged scams to collect insurance money. The owner was arrested. Story 11. My boss got fired because of their own decisions. I just happened to be there. I worked at a drugstore in the US in the early 2000s and controlled substances were going missing from the pharmacy. My district management team called me in and asked if I had any idea who was taking the pills. I did not. I realized much later that asking the assistant manager instead of the manager should have tipped me off immediately that the manager was the suspect. The next night, I closed the store and loss prevention installed extra cameras in the store and pharmacy. I was the only store employee who knew about these cameras, and I went in early or stayed late every day to change the tapes. It wasn't great. No real days off. Shortly after, the manager went on leave for family medical reasons and the pill counts were no longer off. It seemed pretty obvious at that point, but 2 pharmacy techs were also out at that time, so the investigation continued. The manager came back from their leave and was caught on camera entering the store early, entering the pharmacy without a pharmacist present, which is illegal, and then unlocking the controlled substances cabinet. The video did not actually show the manager taking the pills, but the pill count was off from the day before. Again, seemed obvious. The manager was called into the district office the day I delivered the tapes to the district loss prevention team. The manager was suspended pending a formal investigation, then subsequently fired. They were told not to have contact with any employees but took it upon themselves to call the store. And 1, try to frame one of the pharmacy techs, and 2, tell the employees not to believe everything I said. Note, I said nothing through the entire ordeal. So, in the sense that I managed the day-to-day of changing videotapes on secret cameras, I got my boss fired. Here's hoping they are dealing with their painkiller addiction and no longer making bad decisions. Story 12. Boss was running several schemes and got caught when his own boss was replaced. I worked in a restaurant where I was originally hired as a supervisor. From the beginning, I noticed our GM was a bit of a sleazebag because on my first day he told me he expected all of his girls to come to work done up and looking good. If that wasn't enough to put me off, I soon noticed all the women in the restaurant called him Poppy and would frequently give him shoulder massages when speaking with him. Despite being the GM, he was very unpredictable about showing up for work. He'd come in for a total of 4 hours during the week. No matter what schedule he sent to his boss, he put himself on for every day except Sundays. He was impossible to pin down. On my first night closing, he was supposed to train me but left me to do all the procedures by myself. Thank God I had experience in a smaller setting that made me a fast learner. I also noticed he was giving away a lot of rewards to certain staff, gift cards, buying food, bringing in coffee, and always took money from the till to do so. I knew we had a discretionary fund from corporate that managers could spend on staff, but I never saw him take money from that, or even saw that money, despite the fact I was part of management and technically could use it on my shift to reward my staff. At one point, he told us he would be covering another G.Ms vacation at a location 30 miles away and would be there all week. We got a call on the 3rd day of him covering from that location's GM asking where our boss was as he was late to relieve them. It turned out our GM was only scheduled at the other location for 2 days. In the G.Ms last month, we received a new district manager who was much more hands-on than the previous one, and most importantly, wasn't buddy-buddy with our GM. The district manager quickly noticed it was very hard to keep track of our GM. The GM had no clue what time his staff was starting in the morning or what we were doing during our shifts. The breaking point actually came on my birthday. Our GM was scheduled, but not in the store. He instructed me to send 2 of our line chefs home even before lunch because he wanted to cut labor. Someone very high in the company decided to drop by our location and saw that we were slammed with not enough staff. Cut to a week later, when the district manager showed up just as our GM was leaving on an errand. The GM looked a bit nervous but left anyway. The district manager pulled me aside and asked what the hell was going on in the restaurant. They already knew about the fiasco that was the previous week's lunch service, which had me in the kitchen with 1 chef. By then, I had recently been told I was being promoted to assistant manager because our old one left due to the G.mess behavior. I revealed that the GM had informed me I would be working 80 hours a week while he worked 20, and that I was required to pay him 40% of the tips I received in my paycheck. I was to give him cash every payday so he could have his cut. To me, it wasn't a surprise that the GM was absent for a scheduled shift. I told the district manager everything I had just shared, and they were speechless. Within half an hour of the GM returning from errands, he was escorted out of the building, and our staff was told he was never to come back. More crazy developments unfolded afterward, but basically, because of my honesty and refusal to be taken advantage of, someone lost their job that day. Story 13. Something stupid, but ultimately satisfying. New boss made inappropriate advances toward me, then retaliated when I asked him to stop. He fired me on the spot when I told him I would complain to HR. I did anyway, and he was fired. One day, he took an interest in me and started flirting and making inappropriate comments. I consider myself an LGBTQ ally and am usually not offended by compliments from men. Any compliment is a good compliment, but not at work, and certainly not from my boss. It wasn't a secret that I was getting married to a woman in a few months. Some of his inappropriate comments were especially harsh toward women and heterosexual relationships. There was also a separate issue of discrimination against the women I worked with. He made references several times that marrying a woman was dumb, and that I would be happier with a guy like him. I'm not sure why he kept insisting that being gay was the default setting. I ignored him for the most part, until one day he asked if there was anything he could personally do to change my mind. I'd had enough, and told him bluntly that I wasn't interested, I wasn't gay, and I found his behavior inappropriate. I asked him to stop completely, or I would go to corporate. This was about a month before my wedding. After that, my schedule suddenly changed. I worked first shift, then third shift, then second shift, with only 8 hours off between shifts. I told him I needed set shifts, like I'd had for a long time before, to help my fiancé with the wedding preparations. He said, "You should have thought about that before threatening to call corporate on me." I told him he left me no choice, and that I was calling corporate anyway, so he fired me on the spot for insubordination. I called the corporate office and threatened a lawsuit for wrongful termination, giving them a full rundown of what had been happening. About a week later, after an investigation with input from every employee, he was escorted out, and I was granted unemployment without any argument. I heard that when he found out HR was contacting employees, he called them in individually to threaten their jobs if they spoke against him. Guess that didn't work out the way he thought it would. I was planning to quit after my wedding anyway, so I didn't pursue it further. Story 14. Management was giving an injured worker a hard time, refusing to pay him and accusing him of gold-bricking. The worker said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here, or you still be sorry." Management replied, "Take your best shot." So, he did. He called the EPA and the APCD, told them exactly where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. The sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors who had retired 10 years earlier were subpoenaed. It was epic. The company got hit hard with fines and remediation costs, all because they decided to screw over one poor bastard. Edit. Since there may be some questions about how this could happen in the age of electronic reporting, here's the story. It's not the full story. News coverage rarely gets everything right, but since it ran in the LA Times, I'm not worried about privacy. For the record, it was a state agency that was contacted first. The EPA got involved later, at a different site. It's been a few years, and the timeline sometimes gets misremembered. But one thing's certain, once you show up on a regulator's radar, you'd better have your crap tight. Story 15. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched from the sidelines as a teenager. My mom's job was basically professional fundraising. I honestly don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raising money for nonprofits and other foundations in need. This was a long time ago, back when social workers weren't commonly placed in high schools. My high school was very poor and didn't have one. So, my mother took it upon herself to organize a fundraiser to cover the salary for a social worker just so the school could have one. After raising all the money, she approached the principal, who flat out refused to accept it, saying the position wasn't necessary. My mother was upset but decided to donate the money elsewhere, maybe for supplies or another charity. I'm not exactly sure where it went, but it was definitely put to good use. A few months later, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of the district happened to be there and struck up a conversation with my mom. After some small talk, she mentioned how unfortunate it was that the principal had declined the funding for a social worker. The superintendent was stunned. He told her he had specifically ordered the principal to find funding for that position. When he had followed up, the principal told him, "No one is interested in that, and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position. When we returned from the holiday break, the school was hiring for his replacement. Story 16. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney and a serial abuser of female clients and criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed on at least 12 victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation had censured him multiple times for lesser offenses, like being late on his annual bar dues, but even though they were aware of at least 5 of the victims, they still refused to disbar him. I found out that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue disciplinary action based on a cost-benefit analysis. So, over the course of 6 months, I gathered as much documentation and evidence as I could. Story 17. Mine's pretty pedestrian but deeply satisfying. I worked at a garden center for years, way overqualified for the role I had. Think operations manager skills at an admin assistant position, and pay. I stayed because I was good at it, and they relied on me heavily. One year, we lost our sales manager and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person she was instantly rude, strident, mean, curt, dismissive, lazy in that attention-seeking way where she threw her weight around, trashed anyone not in the room, and took 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's far easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach an a-hole horticulturist how to be a decent human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. Meanwhile, I'd already been looking for other jobs. Flora just sped things up a bit. I eventually found the right opportunity and handed in my 2 weeks' notice. The next day, I got an email scheduling an exit interview with the head of HR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews. Only managers, or sometimes department supervisors did, and everyone at the store already knew why I was leaving. So there was no reason for the store manager to make that happen. But he did, and he never said a word about it. He just gave me the chance. So, I told HR the truth, that I was leaving after nearly 10 years with the company because of Flora. That I had written the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person in my role across other stores, created spreadsheets still used company-wide, and set audit records that still stand. And I did all that for just a few cents over minimum wage. But I was done because of her. Later, I found out she was let go. Most of my old coworkers reached out to thank me. My manager never said a word about it then or since. He was a real OG. Story 18. I used to work at a title company and regularly witnessed our department manager forging mortgage documents. It was a pattern, not a one-off. Then, one day she went to upper management and threw the entire department under the bus for being behind on recording documents. I marched straight to HR, handed in my resignation, and told them exactly what she had been doing. She was fired. By the end of the week, they called and offered me my job back. Story 19. For a while, I worked as a project manager who got moved from project to project as a sort of fixer. I was assigned to a project where the customer simply could not be satisfied. No matter how many people we threw at it, how much attention we gave, or how far we bent over backward. Our program director, who should have been advocating for us, refused to manage the customer. Instead, he just hammered his team to do more. People were getting fired for failing or burning out and quitting, and he kept complaining that he couldn't find good people. Because of my odd role as General Dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP. This project came up in casual conversation, and I mentioned that it seems strange how so many employees, people we knew were solid by both fact and reputation, had suddenly failed. A week later, I heard the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. Story 20. I was working maintenance at an ice rink. Anyone who knows how an ice rink works knows that if the Zamboni doors open, you get the hell off the ice. Some idiot ignored that the doors were open, and that I was standing right in the doorway and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, since we had to fill out an incident report for things like that. He asked, "Are you okay?" I said I felt fine. He responded, "Well then we don't really have to report it, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't, I sent a detailed email about the incident up to administration, because I wanted a record in case, God forbid, I ended up with a brain hemorrhage or something later. By my next shift, that boss was fired. Story 21. I had a job where my supervisor was supposed to evaluate my cases and charts, but she hadn't done so in months. She and my director ordered me and my coworkers to audit our own charts, fill out the forms, and they would just sign off on them. I was exhausted from the lack of proper supervision, the weekly staff meetings where she yelled at us, and someone inevitably cried from stress and lack of support, and the fact that I wasn't paid nearly enough for doing both my job and theirs. So, I refused to do the audits. I was told to do it or be fired. I said no, and got fired. On my way to the car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for me the next day, and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked what happened, and I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of my previous agency, so she called her too, and I told her everything. The director was fired, the supervisor reprimanded, and put under close monitoring. She lost any chance of promotion, and from what I heard, left soon after. I was just relieved to have escaped that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Story 22. Our manager spent her entire shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we even paused to talk to each other, she'd come out yelling at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time, I left my water bottle at the front counter, and a coworker had to stop her from purposely throwing it away. She made up rules on the spot. If she didn't like something someone did, I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all went to the owners and told them everything, how it made us feel and how toxic it was. They got HR involved, fired her, and found out she might have been stealing or giving away the product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if the management isn't family. Story 23. It was my supervisor. It got to the point where I had decided to quit. I even had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was leaving. My supervisor constantly talked about everyone on our team, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. To make things worse, my husband and I happened to work at the same company, different departments, and my supervisor would make inappropriate comments about 3 scores with him, He even talked about what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight and stuff like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. On top of all that, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. The problem was, he was one of the guys, and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted when he found out. He told his own boss, who lost his mind. They launched an investigation that took 3 days. They interviewed staff who all backed up what I said. They checked security cameras and saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking. He was fired. When he was told, he guessed, not hard, that I was the one who complained and even tried to get to me to apologize for taking it the wrong way. The best part was my coworkers surrounding me as he was walked out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Story 24. I had a boss who refused to make accommodations for a disabled coworker. She wouldn't keep other staff in line and basically let the disabled worker fall behind and get picked on because she felt she wasn't required to do anything else. I work for a local government agency and reported this to HR and upper management. After they did nothing, I followed up and told them I would be filing a suit with the ACLU for ADA violations. Within 2 weeks, my boss was gone, and the rest of the staff were required to attend mandatory ADA training. Story 25. He was always slacking off, would do a quick 15-minute task, and then disappear for 2 hours. He'd shoot off early for a doctor's or dentist appointment with no prior warning, always whenever he looked bored. This all happened within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and let it slide for a while, but my colleague, who was in her 40s and vaguely knew him, wasn't having it. She repeatedly reported him to our area manager, who decided to come down and speak to him. The area manager called in the morning, told him to stay in the shop all day and send one of us out if anything needed doing. He said he had something to do, but the AM insisted he stay. Somehow, he didn't get the message and left anyway. The AM showed up and found the shop empty. My manager wouldn't answer his phone all day, and the AM was furious. At closing time, he just walked by, tossed his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even try to argue. Story 26. I had proven myself as a competent management-level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, set impossible schedules, and generally didn't care as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in for the promotion. After all, she was the assistant manager. So why wouldn't she be promoted? We were both called into a meeting with the district higher-up, who told us I would be the new manager. She completely lost it. I never saw her again. Soon after, all her relatives who worked there mysteriously quit. Story 27. I was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned before my life collapsed, but that's another story. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing. On quiet nights, if she thought she wasn't getting enough in tips, the place was small enough that on slow nights it was just the two of us working. She would access the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables paid in cash, pocketing the money. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers never matched what was being sold. So I contacted the software company that ran our computer system, and it turned out they had a backdoor even management couldn't see it, that logged every single keystroke. It revealed she had stolen close to $20,000 over 6 months. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason the owner didn't press charges. Story 28. I quit and laid everything out in my exit interview. I explained how my performance reviews were always terrible to justify no raises, despite having emails throughout the year praising my work. I was written up because someone supposedly overheard me say something mean, but my manager never told me what it was and HR never heard about it. Plus, the write-up was done solo by her against company policy that requires another manager present. She demanded I work 80 hours a week just because she wanted me to, and then told me to find a new job. I refused but found a new job within a week, and gave my 2 weeks. I also revealed how she threatened my job after I discovered she and others were altering reports to secure bonuses for themselves. I met with the COO, CFO, VP of HR, and the legal team to share what was going on. Everyone except those involved in the report tampering. After I left, she was moved to a different department and then fired within 3 months. The others involved in changing reports were either fired or demoted. I do feel bad for leaving, though. Within a year, that entire department was shut down, and my friends lost their jobs. Story 29. I didn't get my boss fired. He was the owner, but I did screw him out of a huge contract. This guy was a total a-hole who treated customers like crap, so you can imagine how he treated employees. We worked at a hydraulic repair shop rebuilding cylinders, pumps, and custom parts. I was the only licensed truck driver there. Even the owner didn't have a license. I got so fed up, I decided to quit, but I waited for the perfect moment. The owner was negotiating a multi-million-dollar 10-year contract with a steel company for hydraulic repairs. On my last day, I had to make an emergency delivery to that steel mill. I loaded the truck, clocked out, and went home. When he called freaking out, I told him I was tired of being treated like a slave and that I quit. I wished him luck finding a CDL driver in under an hour. He suddenly panicked and offered me a raise, the first raise he'd ever given. About a week later, a former coworker who'd quit for the same reasons told me the owner had a meltdown the day I quit. He lost the big contract and couldn't figure out why people were leaving. 2 more guys quit that same week. My coworker and I just laughed. No surprise to us, the guy was such a massive a-hole that no one wanted to work for him. Story 30. I repeatedly told supervisors that my direct boss was stealing product and time from the store. Her stories never added up. She never helped on the floor, took long 1.5-hour lunch breaks without clocking out, left early, and claimed she was coming in early when the store didn't even open yet, which I knew was false because she didn't have a key. For 8 months, I raised the issue, but no one followed up. I didn't get her outright fired, but I made sure she couldn't get rehired or use us as a reference. After she left, I was promoted to her position and discovered thousands of dollars worth of empty boxes hidden in her desk drawers. I'm pretty sure she was also skimming cash from the register. What a POS. Story 31. My boss had been with the company for about 25 years and had gotten really complacent. He'd show up around 9 a.m., leave for lunch at 11:30, come back around 1:30, and then sometimes leave early by 2 or 3 p.m. Everyone noticed, but management wanted to put him in the spotlight to either get him to shape up or let him go. I was transferred out of that department because I was the one doing all the actual work. A year later, nothing had improved, so they finally let him go and gave me his job. I didn't get him fired. He did that all on his own, but I knew the plan was in motion and kept it to myself because I wanted that promotion and raise that came with it. Story 32. I was a hotel manager, and my hotel was undergoing a full renovation. During this time, both my managers were putting in less than 30 hours a week, while I was racking up 70+ doing their jobs as well. I'm ambitious and knew it would look great on my resume, so I was happy to bust my ass. 2 months in, I started to notice things going missing. Furniture, funds allocated by corporate to offset loss of revenue were not used, and just general dishonesty. I found out both my managers were pocketing the $20,000 in discretionary funds allocated to us when I overheard a conversation in the back office. I reported them to corporate, and an investigation was launched. 2 days later, on a Friday, I was put on suspension for misconduct by our district manager, and Monday, at 9 a.m., I was told to clean out my office. I was burnt out at this point, so I took it as a victory, filed a retaliation lawsuit. The district manager conducted the investigation with corporate and moved states. 6 months later, everyone was getting fired, and charges had been pressed against 2 managers. I'm back here eating popcorn, sad that I was great at my job but can never work for that company again. Story 33. It's a bit late, so this may get buried. I was working at a large, negatively viewed retailer at the time as an assistant manager. We generally worked single coverage, and I was supposed to work no more than 35 hours. My manager was hourly as well and was at 44 max, but he was working roughly 15 while punching for 48. He came in the mornings even if I was scheduled, took in shipment but didn't process it, then sat in the back. He took the company tablet home with him to take conference calls, took me out of view of the cameras, fake punched me, and called me a little bitch for asking him to approve my vacation and work his scheduled hours. Overall, a stand-up guy. I complained to my district manager, who told me I must have misread the scenario. I told her I was uncomfortable at work and felt unsafe working with him. She said I needed to resolve it between us, that she'd never had any problems with him before. He was hired 3 months prior, and I had been with the company for 4 years, so that statement meant nothing. After considering things, I took my complaint to HR. After getting off the phone with our HR rep who told me nearly the same things, that we could have a joint mediation call to try and resolve it, I got a phone call from the district manager again, asking how I could go over her head like that, saying it was disrespectful and insubordination. I left the day before Thanksgiving with no notice. For a specialty retailer, that's a huge blow. I prepped nothing for Black Friday. The entire back room was packed to the ceiling with unprocessed shipment boxes. It was bad. I found out later that my manager was fired shortly thereafter for stealing and time card fraud. The regional manager found out when he had to come in to help the store. Shortly after that, the district manager was fired for withholding bonus hours for the stores to get her bonus for unused hours. The HR rep for the area was fired the same day for not advocating for employees and taking the district manager's side, who it turns out was her childhood friend. I was actually rehired by the same company because they put my termination in incorrectly 4 months later. Those who were still there welcomed me back with open arms, and I got promoted to manager 2 months after that. So glad to be out of that hellhole company, though. Story 34. So, she wasn't my boss, but someone working for a branched-off part of the company. We worked in rentals. She worked on the tech side, in sales. I'm keeping this vague because the company is honestly one of the best places I've ever worked. She was flying out to my location and wanted an upgrade on the car she was renting. Employees get 50% off discounts, so the policy is no upgraded cars unless we're sitting on a lot of them. At the time of booking, we had enough, so I said it was fine. She wasn't even communicating with me directly. She had 2 other men in our company coordinating with me. That was weird, but whatever. Long story short, she shows up so late, without texting any of us, that the system automatically canceled her reservation. By the time she finally showed up, the car type she wanted was booked. She lost her crap. She was cussing and yelling at my team, stormed into our tiny office, and said she was taking this crap over until we got it sorted, just being all around demanding. I told her we couldn't get her into the car and gave her every single reason. She just kept freaking out on me. It took everything in me not to yell back, but I was trying to set a good example for my team, who were all the fighting type. Eventually, she got in another car, slammed one of her doors into the car next to her, a brand new $50,000 car, and drove off without letting us start her reservation. I instantly called my boss, the VPO, and HR. They took this seriously. It was amazing. By the time she got back from vacation, her job was gone. Then, when I went to HQ a few months later, I was jokingly referred to as the girl who got that girl fired. The craziest part is that she used to hold the same position as me, just in a different city. She knew what we could and couldn't do. She has dealt with insanely rude people, and she knows how seriously that company takes any kind of complaint. Like, did she think none of us were going to do anything about it? Story 35. This wasn't me, but it just happened a few days ago at my work. My boss is an RN manager at an assisted living facility who has worked there for 25 years. I've worked for her for about 4 years, and I know she's put her heart and soul into this job and busted her ass to get where she is. An employee who I have known for about the same amount of time got her fired. This woman is not the most reliable person, often exaggerates and makes up stories to get out of work. Once she came in the morning, saw her schedule for the day, and made up that she was involved in a hit and run on her way to work and needed to leave to file a police report. This employee and a few others were called into my boss' office a few weeks ago and informed that one of our residents had bed bugs. My boss was explaining the how-tos and protocols of the situation. She told the employees not to enter the room unless they were wearing PPE. The aforementioned employee acted confused and said she didn't know what PPE was, even after working in healthcare for over 12 years. My boss got an attitude and said, "Really? You don't know what PPE is? Are you stupid?" The employee allegedly went home that night and tried to commit suicide because she said my boss made her feel so insignificant and small. My boss was fired after the employee notified our employee chaplain. I am so livid that this lying, manipulating lowlife woman has ruined my boss' career and royally screwed over our entire building by getting rid of a hard-working boss, especially during a virus crisis. Story 36. My manager, who also managed a few other direct reports, was incompetent. He barely made it through his interview rounds and was hired by the skin of his teeth, partly because we're in an industry that doesn't have many candidates, something he played to his advantage. He lasted a year or two before the foundation of his smokescreen began to crumble. Then a personal event came up in his life, and he was unable to juggle his work and personal lives. He simply couldn't keep up the charade while dealing with whatever was happening at home. The trust of his workers was already weakening, and after that event, it fell apart completely. Long story short, his direct reports, myself included, documented nearly everything he did and staged a kind of mini mutiny. He was a great person but a terrible manager. Billings and collections were either not done or done incorrectly, which impacted the bottom line and risked future payments. It took several months, but after we all did our jobs, he was eventually let go. Working for him was not easy. It was no longer a collaborative effort to move the company forward. Everything was delegated out, and he took no responsibility, losing emails, breaking promises, showing up late to meetings, and more. At the end of the day, we needed someone who could lead, and he wasn't it. Story 37. To clarify, my boss, one of the two I had, was effectively fired by the client, not necessarily the company, although he left soon after. I was managing a project with a client who often changed directions, but they paid very well and were pleasant to work with from my side. My boss didn't like that the client and I got along well and decided to undermine me at every turn, first with the people under me, then with the client. I was working under his direct orders, which I made sure to get in writing for both myself and the client, but he didn't care about contradicting himself. He just wanted to be difficult. The client was increasingly dealing exclusively with me because they disliked my direct boss attitude and his contradictory instructions, which were slowing everything down. I began reaching out to my second boss for all questions and guidance, since I couldn't get anywhere with boss number one, who was now ignoring my communications. Apparently boss number one got into a bad mood and/or got drunk one night, and I woke up to an email from him to the client with me C.C.D on it, cussing the client out and even going so far as to say nasty things about the client's spouse. As I was working on an email to boss number two about all this, the client emailed me directly to say they knew it was just him, not to worry about what they might do next, and that my team and I were safe. Soon after, they sent an email to both my bosses and me stating they were no longer working with boss number one, that he was fired from their project effective immediately, and that they would be working directly with me and boss number two from then on. Boss number one tried to act up with me and I ignored it because screw that guy. Later I found out that before I started, he had actually cost our company several clients and even got the company evicted from 2 different offices after his terrible dealings with clients and landlords alike. That must have been the last straw, because soon after, boss number one parted ways with our company, went on to start his own company, and still has a hard time getting or keeping clients because of his notoriously bad and egotistical attitude. Shit leopards don't change their shit spots. Lol. Story 38. There was a sweet 18-year-old girl who used to work in the kitchen where I worked through college. Heather was her name. Heather had a significant cognitive impairment. I'm not sure exactly what, but cognitively she was probably around 8 to 10 years old. One day during her lunch, she casually told me she thought our boss was cute and that they had been talking a lot. She then started showing me the messages between them. "What are you wearing? Take a picture of your bra. I'd love to kiss you right now," and so on, about 25 to 30 lewd texts, plus several others that clearly crossed into grooming territory. As far as Heather said, nothing physical had happened, but she was planning to have dinner at his house soon. This seemed very wrong to me, most importantly, because Heather was physically old enough, but was a child trapped in a teenager's body. Secondly, there was a power imbalance, even for someone with age-appropriate cognitive function. I thought the guy was a douche anyway. One of those one-upper types, who always did something slightly cooler than you did. So I made it my personal mission to get him to leave. I had a meeting with the kitchen's admin, and all she said was that Heather was old enough, so there was nothing they could do. I understood that, but it still just felt wrong, I guess. I had a meeting with the president of the facility. She was absolutely appalled. Appalled that my immediate manager was taking advantage of the situation, and appalled that the kitchen admin did absolutely nothing. Within 2 days, she had fired them both and put me in charge on an interim basis. I was already handling many of the administrative duties the admin didn't want to. I stayed there over the summers in college and was the admin for 2 years before I left. It paid a hell of a lot better than washing dishes and cooking food. Story 39. I was hired after waiting hours in line with hundreds of others at a mall for a 2-minute interview and was quickly promoted to shift lead by the end of training, then to shift manager within 3 weeks. The GM was a jerk to everyone from the start, customers and employees alike, and by 6 months, I called the owners to let them know how this guy was running their business and treating employees. They drove 3 hours the next day to check things out and confirm with me. He was gone by that afternoon. The second in command took over next, but I suspected he was having an affair on his pregnant wife with one of the 18-year-old countergirls. The guy always wore different Nikes, and when I saw in the parking lot that he'd bought the girl a couple pairs, I knew something was up and confronted him. After he didn't end things, the situation became more apparent and started affecting operations. I'd had enough and went up the chain again, especially since he expected a hug every time I came in for a shift. The owners were very family-oriented and didn't take lightly what was happening in their store and with their employees. 7 months into the job, I was made general manager and led the store for the next 5 years. No issues, no problems. It was the first job I had on my own. I joke that I usurped 2 mad kings before I took the throne for the better. Story 40. In one of my past jobs, we got rid of 2 higher-ups. One was the franchise owner, who was inviting underage employees to his private residence, giving them alcohol, and insinuating that if they helped him out, they could quickly move up through the company and even own their own restaurant. He was brought down by my coworker's sister, who wrote a detailed account of what happened and how he tried to coerce her. The second guy was a manager and just a huge, disgusting a-hole. He literally told an employee, "If you don't do what I say, I'll take your head off with a machete." It took 6 months to get rid of him, which probably involved illegally recording group meetings where he regularly threatened employees with physical violence. He wasn't fired though, he was moved to Tallahassee to work in their corporate offices. This company is PDQ, if anyone cares. Story 41. I was a worker at Chipotle, FYI, at my store. We always had new G.MS all the time. One GM we had was a complete a-hole. She was so mean that my coworkers were literally scared of her. I have a disorder, and my doctor gave me a note for the store that prevents me from working on the line and serving customers. So I just worked in the back making food and doing dishes. One day, she came up to me and demanded I go on the line, the place where workers serve customers food. I told her I couldn't because of my disorder. She told me to go or else I'd be fired. By the way, this is illegal. If you have a disorder and gave a doctor's note preventing you from doing something, your boss can't force you to do it. After my shift, my father picked me up because I didn't have a car at the time. He saw I was shaken up and immediately knew my boss had put me on the line. He barged into the store and started laying into her. He was furious. After that, she treated me like her servant and never told me what to do, letting me do whatever I wanted, but she still treated my coworkers like animals. So, all the workers, including me, wrote to corporate to complain about her, and she was fired immediately. Yeah, karma bit her hard. Story 42. I had a shift supervisor who was seriously power tripping. She had her clique of friends, and I was the odd one out. She would write me up for stupid things. None were ever signed off by upper management, and I later found out she was eventually told to stop and publicly berate me for small mistakes. I used to work out in the on-site exercise room during my lunch, so one night she announced that I couldn't work out that night. In case we get busy, we can call you. I pointed out that the workout room was literally a 30-second leisurely walk away and within shouting distance. She started screaming in front of the shift about me being insubordinate. That night, she left the site for an hour and a half. Lunch is an hour to go to Walmart. When I snapped and resigned, upper management and HR did an exit interview. When this came out, they started checking video and found she was leaving the premises for upwards of 4 hours in a 12-hour shift on mystery errands. After more investigation, she was demoted to worker B, quit in a fit of rage, and tried to sue for discrimination. Last I heard, every lawyer she hired quit when they saw the results of the investigation. I was asked to come back, but I had already found a job I adore that pays twice as much. I'm still on good terms with my old workplace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.